they don't want to be the one to try to convince this person that it might be time to retire from driving. So I founded Keeping Us Safe. That's the name of this organization. And we work only with older drivers and their families. And we developed this 3-hour self-assessment program where we go into the older driver's home. We meet with them at their kitchen table, I like to say, and we work through 3 hours of exercises and a very lengthy learning conversation or personal interview. And then, assuming it's safe to do so, we go out and go for a ride with them. And then at the end of that session, we try to help them make the right decisions about their driving future. And that can be anything from, as you can imagine, Mr. Smith, I think you're doing a great job. Call us if anything changes in the future, to the other extreme that, Mr. Smith, I don't even think you should drive out the driveway to get your mail every day, or somewhere in between. But I jokingly say I made the mistake of putting up a website when I started this, and I started getting calls from across the country from people worried about mom or dad's driving, wanting to know if we could provide this service there. Well, of course, they were from all over the place, and I hadn't started the company for that reason. I just wanted a way to give back to the community here in the greater Cleveland area, which is where I happen to live. But since then, Lisa and everyone else, it's grown. We have representatives now in 22 different states that provide this service. So regardless of where you're watching this webinar from, hopefully we can help you if you do need some assistance. But anyhow, today's topic, I just wanted to I say all of that by way of introduction, but today's topic is a safe drive through the aging process. And hopefully I can offer everyone, whether you're an older driver or a professional caregiver, a family caregiver, or anyone else concerned about someone's driving safety, hopefully there's something I can offer you today that will be of value to you. First, nobody wants to listen to boring statistics, and I understand that, but here's one that I think is very relevant, very important. In a 2-vehicle fatal crash, where one driver is 70 or older, the older driver is 3.5 times more likely to be the person that's killed in that accident. And notice this has nothing in the world to do with who's wrong in the crash. So an older driver, your mother, your father, you yourself, can be 80 years old, driving down the road, might be the best driver on the road. A younger driver runs a red light or a stop sign and hits your car on the side. If someone's killed, there's a 3.5 times better chance it's you than the younger driver. And again, this has nothing to do with who is wrong in the accident. And the primary reason for that, there are all sorts of reasons, but primarily it's because of our frailty. You know, we can't take a hit at 80 years old like we could at 30 years old. And that's why oftentimes we hear of older adults falling and typically breaking a bone as a result of that fall. And that, again, is because of their frailty primarily. So, what types of things can an older driver do? What types of things can you suggest to your loved one to try to help keep them safe as they progress through the natural aging process? I'm imagining that some of our viewers today have said to mom or dad, Mom, why don't you drive only on familiar roads? If you have to go somewhere new, one of us kids will take you. Probably someone here has suggested that they only drive shorter distances. Dad, quit taking the long trips to Boise, Idaho to see your brother. When you want to go out there, we'll take you or we'll fly you. We'll make some other arrangements. Probably somewhere along the way you've suggested that they drive on less traveled roads. You know, stay off the interstates, Dad. Drive only during daytime hours, of course, is a popular one. Avoid rush hour traffic and don't go out when the roads are bad, which is almost always here in the greater Cleveland area. And these tips, I want to talk about these as a group. They're excellent tips. A lot of times, I mentioned this 3-hour session, a lot of times we might offer or recommend to the older driver that they follow any number of these different tips for different reasons. But I want to talk about them as a group for 1 minute. For me personally, I went to high school in Northwest Ohio. It's very rural, very farmish, very flat, flat as a pancake, we say. But I went to school with this kid named John. And that really was John's name. John's name was John. And as we got up into our high school years, I noticed that John couldn't do any extracurricular activities. He couldn't play football. He couldn't be in the band. He couldn't play baseball. He couldn't do any of those things because when the bell rang at the end of the day, John had to get home and help his parents and the rest of his family with the farming operation. And I think that's probably how most farms operate, farm families. So John and I like to say we miraculously graduated from high school and went our own directions. And John stayed on the farm, and as did his brother and his sister. And they ended up over the years building their own homes throughout the property and started their own families, of course. Now, several decades have passed, and Mr. and Mrs. Smith were completely retired from the farming operation. They were in their upper 80s. And John and his two siblings had taken the farm over, throughout the years, and were doing everything farm-wise. So, but what Mr. and Mrs. Smith liked to do was in the mornings, every morning, they took a drive and they drove throughout their around the outskirts of their property and checking whatever it is retired farmers like to check. I suspect ditch rows and crops and cattle and all sorts of things like that. And then they would drive right back home. It was just something they enjoyed doing. On this particular Saturday morning, they did exactly what I described, drove, around their property and making sure everything was in good order. And the way their house was set up, or their home, it was at a crossing intersection. So one road, just county roads out in the middle of nowhere, but one road went this way and one road crossed it. The crossing traffic did not have to stop. So what Mr. and Mrs. Smith would do, I'm kind of confusing the whole, I wanted to paint a picture, but I'm making it messy. But they would stop for this stop sign out basically in front of their house. They'd check traffic, make sure nothing was coming, and then go across. And then almost immediately they would turn right into their driveway. This farmhouse was at one of the four corners of the intersection. On this Saturday morning, they did just what we said, and they came back, coming back home. They got to the stop sign, stopped, looked both ways, evidently didn't see anything, started to pull into the intersection, and they got hit by a dump truck that did not have to stop, like I said, on the crossroad. And the dump truck driver was forced off the road. He hit a tree and was killed. And Mr. and Mrs. Smith, sadly, just like it depicts in this image, burnt to death in their very own front yard. They know that they survived the impact because they could hear them screaming as the car burned, sadly. So the reason I share that with you is I want to ask you now, were they on a familiar road? Yes, of course they were. Was it a shorter distance? It was. They kind of really didn't even leave their property. It was a less traveled road. It was two farm roads out in the middle of nowhere. It was during the daytime. There was no such thing ever as rush hour traffic. And it was a beautiful Saturday morning, weather-wise and road condition-wise. So the moral of that story is, as good at tips as these are, and they are, an older driver may very well reach the point where he or she has outlived the usefulness of these tips. So we can share these tips with mom or dad. And again, I can't speak highly enough for them, but the day may still come where it's time for someone to have the conversation with them about giving up driving. These tips have a shelf life. They're not going to be valid tips forever. Mom or dad may very well reach the point where it's simply time to give up driving. NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, says that on average, Americans now are outliving their safe driving years by 7 to 10 years. So with that being the case, all of us can expect the day to come where it's simply no longer safe to drive. I think too often we hang our hats on these tips and we think that'll keep mom safe forever if she just does these things. And that might be true, like it says here, in reducing the likelihood, but there still may come a day where she just needs to give up driving. So what are some of the reasons that a family member, I know many of you here today are family members, as we said earlier, caregivers or professional caregivers, or just adult children, but what are some of the reasons that someone might be reluctant to talk to mom or dad about giving up driving? Well, first of all, it can be an unnerving and uncomfortable conversation. You may not want to generate any conflict with your father or your mother or hurt their feelings. You might be concerned that going and talking to dad might actually make this whole driving issue worse. You don't want to challenge or disrespect your parents. For me, I'm a retired Ohio State trooper, as I mentioned, but so was my father. Before that, he was in the United States Army. So I wasn't raised in an environment where I went around telling my parents what they were and weren't going to do, as you can imagine. And I semi-jokingly say it's still that way today after all these years. So for me, that's kind of an issue. You might be overloaded with other responsibilities. I'm sure if we took a survey today, most of you are at work or have had some appointments, whether they're professional or personal. You're busy. We're all busy raising our families and working in our career and doing all sorts of other things. It's not that your father or mother is not the most important thing in the world to you. They probably are. But you still got to balance that with, I've still got things to do. You know, I can't drop everything and take mom to the doctor today. I can't drop everything and take dad to get his haircut this afternoon. So you know, you're already overloaded with responsibilities, and that might be one reason that you kick this can down the road for another day. Or lastly, denial that your mother or father's disease, whatever that happens to be, oftentimes dementia or Alzheimer's disease, whatever. And again, these are all reasons that you might try to avoid this conversation. And you know that I'm kind of preaching to the choir on that topic. So what are some warning signs of diminished driving skills in mom or dad? More frequent close calls, dents or scrapes. We do this 3-hour session, and a lot of times I'll pull into the older driver's driveway and I'll see their car, and their driver's side mirror is duct taped back up to the car, and the passenger side outside mirror is hanging by a couple of wires, and there's all sorts of scratches and dents, and I know then that I'm in the right driveway probably. More conflict on the road. Or the next bullet point is just important, oblivious to the conflict on the road. I did one of these sessions with an 86-year-old lady down near Dayton, Ohio, and I asked her this first question, Mrs. Smith, do you notice more conflict on the road? Are people honking at you maybe a little bit more than they used to? And she responded, why, yes, Mr. Gurwell, when I'm out driving, everybody honks at me because they all know me. I'm 86 years old. I've lived in this community for all my life. And then she added, she joked, which I got a kick out of. She said, more often than not, I don't even know who they are, but they're all honking and waving at me. So so that's an example of what I'm talking about. She's oblivious to the frustration of other drivers. I gave her the benefit of the doubt at the time. I thought, well, maybe she's right. But when we went out and did our driving exercise that I mentioned a moment ago, I realized that no, that's not why they're honking at her. Reluctance from friends or relatives to have the senior drive them somewhere, and getting lost more often. I want to take 1 minute and talk about this one. A lot of times families and the older driver, his or herself, don't understand the important role memory plays in safe driving. I've been told this many times that, so what if my dad gets lost? I understand how that's a convenience issue. He's liable to miss his doctor's appointment. He's going to spend more money on gas, and it's going to ruin his day. But how is it a safety issue? And that's a topic I could talk about for days, really. But here was the headline in the Washington Post back in winter day in 2011. And it read, elderly couple found frozen to death after what? After getting lost. That was their demise. Mr. and Mrs. Fresh, who this is Mr. and Mrs. Fresh in this image, and this is their car stuck in a farm field. The photo was taken by a helicopter, and I know it's not a good quality photo, but to my knowledge, it's the best one that exists. But what happened was they were to go and celebrate his birthday on Sunday. They were to go to the adult daughter's house, who lived 20 or 30 miles away, a trip they'd made a million times, so it was kind of in their safe zone. But they showed up a couple days early. They showed up on the Friday before Sunday. The birthday party was on Sunday. They showed up the Friday before. So of course the adult daughter said, "Mom and Dad, you're welcome here, but what are you doing here?" And they said, "Well, we're here for Bill's party." Well, Bill's party isn't till Sunday. So they played some board games and ate lunch together. And they sent Mom and Dad home with the instructions to come back on Sunday. Well, it was Tuesday before they found them. Again, and they were frozen to death in this farm field. They speculate that they got lost going home. They had forgot their cell phone on the kitchen counter, and they think now it might have been nighttime. They drove into an opening in a farm fence, and they drove up a little. This was out toward Philadelphia. Drove up a little knoll and down it, and then they got stuck in this field. So the problem was you couldn't see the car from the road. So they were kind of in this knoll, and they think that he got out first, went to look for help, and when he didn't return, because it was dark, she couldn't see him, but he had collapsed, and when he didn't return, she went looking for him, and as I said, they found him on Tuesday morning, frozen to death in this farm field, about 30 yards from each other. And again, the whole point here is it's a decline in memory that caused their deaths. It wasn't their driving abilities. Mr. Fresh may have been the best driver on the road. Again, there's all sorts of these cases that happen every day. I don't think I have a slide here for it, but in St. Louis, Missouri, there was a 93-year-old Tuskegee airman who we all know who they are. He went to visit his daughter, who also lived in St. Louis, on a Sunday morning, and same thing. It was on the safe route. You know, the family approved. Dad, one of the places you can drive to is the daughter's house, and he got lost going there, just like Mr. and Mrs. Fresh did driving home. He got lost going to his daughter's, so he knew he was lost, knew he needed help, couldn't get himself unlost. He pulls over. He sees some guys on the sidewalk, and of course asks them for help, and they robbed him. So he takes off. He sees he's scared to death if he wasn't before. He takes off. He sees a couple more people standing on a different sidewalk, and he stops in a panic and says, "Look, I've just been robbed. I can't find my daughter's house. I'm lost. I need help." And they steal his car from him. So you can imagine, fortunately, that story turned out okay. But you can imagine how that could have not ended well either. And there's story after story after story of how memory is what got an older driver, or in this case, drivers, into trouble and actually cost them their lives. So why might the senior, his or herself, be reluctant to give up driving? They might believe that they would become a burden to others. They might think that losing the right to drive can add to a previous loss. Imagine this gentleman in the image here. His wife passed away some 6 months ago, we'll say. And now his kids are banging on the door saying, "Dad, we think you shouldn't drive any longer. We want your keys in your car." Wouldn't it certainly seem like the end of the world to this gentleman? And of course, fewer social opportunities. That's the big one, losing their independence. I want to say that that does not have to be the way it is. I do these talks all over the place, and one of the presentations we have is for older drivers themselves, or older adults, I should say, because some of them are non-drivers. But if it's a larger group, I always like to ask the audience this question: is there anyone in here who has never driven? And inevitably, I have a couple, three people will raise their hand. I never drove. I never had a driver's license. Remember, these are people now in their 80s or 80s plus, maybe. And I pick one at random, and typically it's a female, and that raised her hand in the first place. So I pick one and ask her, "Do you think you missed out on social events and social opportunities throughout your life because you never drove?" And they say the same thing every single time: "Nope." They figured out how to get to the places they want to get to. I did a presentation in Akron once with a group of older adults, and off to my left was, they were all older folks, but she had this scowl on her face. And I don't think she was happy to be there at that moment, and I don't think she was happy with what I was saying, and I don't think she was generally happy overall. Over here on the right was kind of the opposite. She reminded me of my mother. She had a big smile on her face, and it didn't matter what was going on, she was smiling. And I noticed the two of them. Well, when we got 10, 15 minutes into the presentation, the lady on the left says, if anybody ever tries to take my keys or my car from me, I'll just die. I'll show them, I'll die. And you could tell she meant that. And everybody knew that she meant that from the bottom of her heart because it hushed the room. So we go on about the presentation. And later, a half hour later, we're on on the same subject, but talking about a different point. And the lady on the right says, if I ever have to give up driving, she says, it won't make a lick of difference to me. She said, I'll just have to figure out how to get to where I want to go. She said, but I'll figure it out. She had that very sincere, honest smile on her face. So driving home that day, I thought to myself, what would happen if both of them had to give up driving tomorrow? What would happen to the lady on the left? We know exactly what would happen because she promised us what would happen. And what would happen with the lady on the right. And we know, of course, what would happen with her as well. I did one of these sessions with Evelyn. Evelyn was one of the very first people I ever met with. And I really, honestly, between just us, I didn't know what I was doing. I was still new at this. And so I met with Evelyn. It was just her and I in this room. She was in an assisted living community. We had a conference room, and it was just her and I. And we worked our way through the program. We went out for a ride together, and Evelyn drove the wrong way down a one-way street. And, there was good evidence that she probably shouldn't be driving any longer. So near the end of the session, I'm sitting here telling Evelyn why I think she shouldn't drive any longer. And she starts crying. And her adult daughter was waiting outside in the lobby for us to get done so we could come out and talk to her about what took place and what the recommendations are. So Evelyn starts crying, and she's pretty much got me crying. She says, this is the worst thing I've ever had to deal with since the recent passing of my husband. And I felt horrible. Evelyn felt horrible. So we walk out to tell her the session was over. We went out to tell the daughter that we're done, and the recommendation is that she shouldn't drive any longer. And Evelyn as we're walking out the door, she puts her hand on my forearm and she says, let me tell her. I said, okay. So Evelyn gets reconnected with her daughter, and Evelyn says right away, she said, I made the decision on my own to give up driving. And there was no more crying, no more nothing. Well, so that was the end of that. And that was the end of that. So a month later, Evelyn calls me, and I was kind of, she was special to me because she was one of the very first people I ever met with. And I knew who she was, and she's still crying on the phone. And she says, I just have to tell you, when my neighbors and my friends and my family, my church family found out that I gave up driving, she said, they have come out of the woodwork to help me get to the places I want to get to. She said, and I realize now she's crying happy tears. She says, as it turned out, giving up driving at this point in my life where I thought it was the end of my world, turned out to be the best thing that could have happened to me right now. So it does not always have to mean fewer social opportunities. And again, that's another topic I could talk about forever. For hours, maybe not forever, but for hours, about how individuals can maintain their independence. I mentioned earlier the name of our company is Keeping Us Safe, but the name of this 3-hour session that we talked about is Beyond Driving with Dignity, because we place such a huge emphasis on helping the older adult maintain their pride and their dignity and their independence through what is likely to be one of the most difficult transitions of their life, and that is giving up driving. I know for me, I love to drive. Somebody asked me recently what my hobbies were, and I said driving. I like to go for a drive every evening. I just enjoy it. And I was a state trooper. I'd go in at the start of my shift, and they'd slide me a set of keys and say, go out and take this car and look busy for 8 hours, and then bring us the car back. That was what I did for a career. And, I already dread the day where I can no longer drive. But I'm also learning that there are all sorts of ways that I can still maintain my independence despite a driving retirement. And that's what we try to help people do. A couple of tips quickly. When and how should the conversation start? Don't wait, as it says here, until mom or dad has been involved in some type of incident. I call it a triggering event. Number one, of course, that could be serious and it could be too late. But number two, here's what's going to happen. If you and your siblings discuss, well, maybe we need to talk to dad about giving up driving. This happened, that happened. So, and they decide, the game plan is the next time something happens, the next time he gets lost, the next time he has a fender bender, or bumps into a shopping cart at Walmart, we're going to use that opportunity to talk to him about giving up driving. So here's what's going to happen. Now he gets lost, or he receives a traffic citation, we'll say, from the police for whatever reason. And the family sees this as an opportunity to have that discussion with him. Here's what he's going to say. What are you kidding me? You know, I remember when you were 25 years old and you had 2 accidents in one winter, or when you got 2 speeding tickets in the same summer, that type of thing. I've been driving for twice as long as you have, if not longer. And this is the very first traffic citation I've ever received. And in his mind, that is a legitimate argument. That why, just because I got my first ticket, do you think it's time to come and tell me that I shouldn't be driving? So you're going to have to fight that battle. And quite frankly, I've never seen anybody win that. I did one of these sessions in Tampa, Florida once, where what happened was, Mom and Dad, they only drove on Sundays. It's that kind of story. They would leave home, drive to church, drive to their favorite restaurant, and then go back home. So on this particular Sunday, they leave home, they drive to their favorite restaurant, their church, they go to their favorite restaurant. This is not that accident. This is just some picture of somebody driving halfway through a building. But so they go to park in front of the building, the restaurant, kind of like what is here in the picture, and he gets the brake and the gas pedal confused, and he accelerates up over the parking curb, over the sidewalk, and into and halfway through this crowded Sunday afternoon restaurant. 7 or 9 people to the hospital. 2 of them they did not think were going to survive. And on Tuesday, as luck would have, not as it worked out, as the family scheduled, they had me in Tampa, Florida, talking to this gentleman and having him go through that 3-hour session. And the families explained that they wanted to do that, even though it was after the fact, because they were concerned about the liability. They didn't want to be sued. They knew Dad was going to get sued, but they didn't want, as adult children, for that to trickle down to us too. So they wanted to show the civil system that they were being proactive. And once they sensed trouble, they hired somebody to come down and talk to Dad about his driving. Anyhow, I'm sitting in the kitchen with this gentleman, and he's aggravated at everything. He's mad about this accident. He's mad at his wife. He's mad at his adult children for having me come down. He tells me that the people weren't really hurt. They were pretending to be hurt so they could sue me, and on and on and on. But he takes me to his picture window. It was a ranch style home, and he said, and he lived on a residential street. He says, "Look at the cars going up and down the street." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "How many of those people do you think have had more than one accident in their driving career?" I said, "I'll bet you a bunch." And he said, "Then who do you think you are to come here after I've had my first traffic accident ever in my life and suggest to me that maybe I shouldn't be driving any longer?" And he went on to say, "If I do the same thing next Sunday, I'm still a better driver than you are, because that'll only have been my second accident ever." So that's the hurdle as a family that you're going to not be able to overcome if you wait until there's some triggering event, regardless of how significant or serious it is. So I encourage everybody to, regardless where your parent is at on that safe driving continuum, to have those conversations, start those conversations now. Hopefully your parent's still a great driver and has all of their faculties about them, both physically and cognitively. But whether they do or not, now's the time to go home this evening and say, "Mom, did you see on the news where this gentleman ran up and into and through the crowded restaurant on Sunday? Mom, if it's ever time for you to give up driving, I hope that you'll listen to me." So grease those driving conversation skids now, so that when you have to escalate the tone of that conversation, then you're ready to do that. It is important to cite specific examples with your loved one. Don't make general statements like, "Dad, you're a poor driver. Dad, you're going to hurt somebody." Much better, as it suggests here, is to give them specific examples. And quite frankly, I think they're owed that. They have been driving for gosh, 60, 70 years and have never had an accident and never a traffic citation. I hear that, by the way, from every single older driver I ever meet with. I like to say I never met an older driver that didn't think he or she was still the best driver on the road. But some of these folks, many of them have not had an accident, so they're owed. Tell me why you think I should give up driving. Again, I did one of these sessions here in Cleveland with this he's a retired business owner, very wealthy, very affluent, very connected, very well educated. We get in the car to do the driving component of this session, and we're in his new Jaguar, and he's driving down the road, and it was on a day like is depicted in the picture. It was a beautiful day. It was a beautiful fall day. And all of a sudden, he reaches down and turns on the windshield wipers on his Jaguar, which, by the way, do something like this. And he wasn't attempting to use the washer fluid. Nothing had landed on our Jaguar that he was trying to brush off. And we drove for several miles like that. Once he got him turned on, he was happy with the outcome of that. And we drove down the road on this dry day with these Jaguar wipers doing this. And his traffic was horrible. Many of you are, well, all of you probably are from this area, but we were going northbound on Route 91 at Mayfield Road, you know where the hospital is, Hillcrest. So we were headed north toward Lake Erie on Route 91, Som Center Road, and he turns left onto Mayfield from the far right lane. And you can imagine, of all the intersections to do that at, that's probably not going to have a good outcome. But we did. We made it safely, only because of the good defensive driving habits of the other drivers. But I asked him to switch drivers. He's only one of two. I've done 400 of these sessions. He's only one of two people that I've ever switched drivers with during the driving component. And so now I'm in the driver's seat of the Jaguar. He's in the passenger seat. I'm trying to find our way back home. We're basically both lost. And there's a long silence. And he says to me then, why the change? Why are you driving and I'm the passenger when I'm taking a driving test? And I went through some of these things with him. And again, there's another long silence. And then he says, if half of what you said is true, then I have no business driving. And that's what the value of presenting him with the facts and not making general statements. We got back to his home and he placed his keys on the kitchen counter and he told his wife, here's my keys. I have no business driving. And he was actually kind of aggravated with her that she hadn't been more specific. She had just been throwing out these general statements about how bad his driving was. So please remember, base your comments to your loved one on facts, not opinions or emotions. Planning ahead is the key to helping your mom or your father maintain their independence. You need to come up with a plan B. When you go to talk to mom or dad about retiring from driving, have a plan B in place. Say, Dad, but I know these going golfing on Tuesdays with your buddies, going to here on Wednesdays, going to whatever it is you like to go to. My brothers and sisters and I have put together a plan. Here's how we're going to get you to those places so that you don't lose your independence. Remember this, it's a study from Harvard Medical School, and this isn't rocket science, but they found out that loneliness kills, and nobody wants that for their loved one. You don't want them to lose their independence. And this doctor went on to write, it's as powerful as smoking or alcoholism. And it's very important. Remember, again, the name of our program is Beyond Driving with Dignity, because that piece is so important. Anybody can take mom or dad's car from them. It's called a tow truck. You can do that from anywhere in the country. It's a very quick phone call. But it's just as important that they're able to maintain their independence. At most, we like to say here at Keeping Us Safe, a retirement from driving might mean a loss of convenience, but it should never mean a loss of independence. And how'd I do on time, Lisa?
That was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I've got the contact information for Keeping Us Safe at the bottom if anybody's interested in talking about anything further. Otherwise, Lisa, thank you very much for having me. And I think you wanted to open it up to questions and answers.
Sure, folks, if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat box there. And Matt, maybe you could describe just a little bit about, I've had the benefit from hearing you speak previously about how a family would contact you and how that visit with an older loved one goes. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that process.
Sure, absolutely. So it's performed at the older driver's home at their kitchen table, Lisa. I like to say it's the one place in the world they're most comfortable. The whole session, it takes 3 hours on the outset from start to finish, but the whole session is errors in the older driver's favor. We try to give them every possible benefit of the doubt so that if they shouldn't be driving, and we tell them that, then they're a lot more receptive to what we have to say. So a lot of that 3 hours is spent building a rapport with that person and developing some trust between us. And like I said, one of the ways we can do that is by giving them every benefit of the doubt throughout the session. But we go through what we call our learning conversation, where I try to, or we, any one of our representatives tries to find out more about the person. We ask, of course, all of the things you would expect us to ask when we're checking someone's driving. We ask them about their medications, how many falls have they had, how much driving do they do, any contact with the police, any accidents, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But Lisa, we also ask them, what was your favorite vacation as a child, and why was it so? And another question we ask is, what was your first car and what do you remember about it? Every time you ask an 85-year-old person what was their first car and what do you remember about it, they get this giant grin on their face, whether they like the car or not. And they remember it oftentimes like it was yesterday. They can't remember today's date. They might have forgotten how many kids they have, but they remember everything, every detail about that first car. One of my favorite responses was a gentleman said, it was a 19 something something something. He said, but the front seat was a bench seat, or the front seat was a bench seat. And he said, my wife and I could sit next to each other and smooch. But it takes them back to a happier time. Again, whether they like the car or not has nothing to do with it. But that's all part of this building a rapport and a sense of trust with them. Again, so that if they shouldn't be driving, then they're a lot more receptive to what we have to say. 2/3 of the people we meet with for this session actually retire from driving as a direct result of the session. And remember, not everybody that we meet with needs to give up driving. Sometimes there's a happy medium. Maybe it needs to be restricted some. And it goes back to those tips that we talked about at the onset of this presentation. Or maybe they're fine to continue driving. We get those calls from adult children that say, look, my dad might be fine, but he lives in Cleveland. I'm in San Diego, California, and I just noticed he's sounding funny on the phone. He's forgetting things. He stumbles with these words. He's taken some new medications, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we go and meet with him, and he might be fine to continue driving. And then, Lisa, back to the session, we do about 8 cognitively related exercises, and we, as you can imagine, because you heard me talk a minute ago, but we place a lot of focus on their memory. Just because they can't remember their wedding anniversary date, which is one of the questions we ask, doesn't mean in and of itself that they shouldn't be driving. But if they can't remember that, they can't remember if their spouse is still living, they can't remember how many children, I'm talking from experience, I've had all of these things. They can't remember how many children they have. They don't know what the current year is, but they know it's 19 something. And on and on and on. Then that paints a very different picture on whether or not this person should be driving. And then within 10 days of the session, the family will receive a very detailed report about exactly what took place, and they'll have copies of all the paperwork that we did and all the exercises that this person did. And a lot of times these recommendations to go through this program come from medical professionals, from doctors. And then that report then can be shared by the family back with that referring physician. Let me throw this in. For drivers that are still okay to continue driving, remember I mentioned 2/3 of our clients should give up driving. But for that other third, we offer them a complimentary revisit session somewhere down the road. So let's say I meet with someone's mother today and they're fine. But 6 months or 6 years from now, their condition changes, they develop Alzheimer's or their dementia worsens, and they want to reconsider the driving issue at that point, then we would come back out and there would be no additional charge for that second visit. We can, you can contact us through our website, keepingussafe.org, or by calling 216-904-8841.
Great. We don't have any questions in the chat box. Anyone on the phone have a question? No. Well, Matt, thank you so much for coming to us today. We appreciate your time, and thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you, Lisa, and everyone as well.
Have a great day.